Hello, Margaret Coolman here with Soul Astrology, endeavouring to speak from the perspective of the soul. And I find myself looking at this wonderfully complex and yet beautifully reflecting itself chart. I love it that it's the personal signs, the first 6 under the horizontal middle line, so beautifully reflecting the more social signs, the second 6. I think of the first 6 as being where we get in touch with the elements that we'll be dealing with in this earthly dimension. So that's Aries, Taurus, Gemini and Cancer, introductions to the 4 elements. And then Leo, the statement of ourself, the heart. Here I am, and then turning to face the material side of experience in Virgo and how to do it. And that's this second new moon in Virgo. That can only happen when the first one is right at the very beginning. So the second one can just slip in to the last degree and still have almost 30 degrees between them. In this chart, Venus is also in Virgo, just arrived, and the South Node is going through Virgo anyway for the more or less 18 months it takes to do that. It's in the middle at 18 degrees, where humanity is coming from right now, having to look at the bits and pieces and the results of past behaviour, efforts. When everything is connected, you can't isolate anything. All of this seems to be a kind of suggestion that we let go of thinking we're in control of any of it. And I think that's a most peaceful thought to have. But it doesn't absolve us from all action, and we still have responsibility in the sense of the ability to respond to what's actually surrounding us now and how we have become through the process. Which means that we have to be true to ourselves. We have to know how our system is responding on all levels. Well, I seem to have been thoroughly got by this pattern. As above, so below. What is inside reflects what is outside, and the other way around as well. The outside is a reflection of the inside, which is to say, that each one of us with our own personal view sees that which we understand is there, and each one has their own understanding, so we're all living in our own world, really. The wonder is that we ever understand each other at all, which does suggest that there are other levels on which real understanding takes place, or at least is accessible to us. It's a beautiful triangle, double triangle. The sun and moon at the very end of Virgo are pretty much on that line, and that point is most nearly in perfect contact with Pluto at the beginning of Aquarius and Uranus at the beginning of Gemini, both air signs, whereas the new moon itself is in the earth sign of Virgo. So it's good that Mercury is in Libra, the third of the air signs, and near enough to linking in to that triangle that we may have some understanding of what it's about. Mercury referring to our mental activity, our communication and so on. So there's a possibility that we might understand what this is all about. And certainly with Saturn being in Pisces, as well as the Neptune still in Aries, that opposition to Sun, Moon and Mercury brings in all 4 elements. It's as though the crossbow has been drawn, is set, ready to fire. But of course, in astrological symbolism, there isn't going to be any firing exactly, unless we look at Mars squaring Pluto. Now there's a potential for action. While Mars is still hanging on to the last degree of Libra, perhaps action is delayed But almost immediately after this new moon, Mars moves into Scorpio and makes that square to Pluto precise. With Scorpio being ruled by Mars and Pluto, both, that Mars should be in Scorpio at that point emphasizes the potential for action, and whatever the action, it will be transformative. And until then, if this is a true reflection of what's out there, one might say we must wait and see. But there is also the flavour of that whole energy building up beforehand and fading only after. So although the actual day of the square is just after the new moon, it's a good 2 weeks that the influence of this pattern is potentially reflecting actual happenings, events that we might recognise as being this important. Mars sextiles Venus, and Venus is square, of course, in the reflection, but squaring Uranus. Venus has to do with how we're relating. In Virgo, well, on a personal level, it can be quite picky, critical, that is, precise. Things have to be exact, because one's dealing with very fine delineations, very fine definitions. It's like very precise metalwork when you're making gadgets. You want to get it precise, because otherwise it's clumsy and the effort to make it work would break things. And perhaps that's what the square to Uranus would suggest, that there is the possibility of breaking things. Now, being Venus, it's about relating. So relationships, it's quite possible that the suddenness of our speech, coming from maybe the suddenness of our realizations, is actually too brutally honest and could break relationships. As Venus trines Chiron in this chart, we would be looking at old wounds which are being exaggerated somewhat within the pattern here by Jupiter trining Saturn, Neptune, and being part of that great outer planet pattern that's coming along with us. So it's about nurturing, it's about caring, it's about family, children, feeding. It's about the food distribution. It's about starving children. The things said may or may not be useful. Some of the things said are going to be destructive. There will be those who would like to appease and go gently forwards in order to save, prevent, limit the disaster. And there will be others who say, no, you've just got to break the whole thing down, kill more, just kill different people. Each of us must stand by our own values, to be clear on what we think, and yet to listen to other points of view. Before anything final is done in any situation, what we need is the most information we can gather so that we can make the best decision we can. We need to do our best. We are not responsible for the results. That would be control, and we're not in control. But we are responsible for expressing our truth, for putting ourselves solidly where we believe we should be. Now that may divide us unless we are able to listen. I said in the letter right at the beginning, I love that phrase, everything happens at the right time. And that's part of this totality of things, that what happens is held and surrounded and moved by everything else in life, and the timing of all of it is in the moment. I think it's the difference between a process and a timeline. The process is three-dimensional, and like a piece of music, there's only the sound. in the moment that you hear. The particular beauty of this new moon chart to me is that those two squares, the Venus and Mars, squaring Uranus and Pluto, also have quincunxes, both of them, to Saturn and Neptune. And to me, a quincunx indicates the correct way to be, more nearly in line with the soul's own purpose. The movement of the process is, maybe we could say, a spiritual unfolding, continuous creation, an upwelling of life. So much has already been said about Saturn and Neptune, and that 0 degrees Aries point as the beginning of all things. And of course, going back, as they're both going back into Pisces, you could also call that point the end of all things. It's not the end of all things, it's the end of the past. It's where we've come from. So it's the end of what has been. And those two planets are both going back. They're going back into Pisces. It gives us another opportunity to focus in on what we're leaving behind, what we need to leave behind. I think I was saying last month as well, it's not to be resolved. In a process, you can't look back and say, if that hadn't happened then, because we don't know what then. There isn't a future to that one, unless it's on a different timeline. But then I think all we can deal with is what we have, which is this unrolling process. We're not solving the past, we're arriving in the present. We're arriving in the present, and in order to properly arrive, we need to look to the other levels of life, that which we generally don't pay attention to, or all that which gets relegated to the unconscious. Haven't got time to deal with that now, sort of thing. We have to go back and see what there is there that we may be inadvertently still carrying. It's getting up to date. It's all that stuff. So we're going to be doing this for another 3 or 4 months, a bit more for Neptune. And then the movement forward again into Aries. We will feel firmly shunted into this future that we've been having a little look at over the last few months. No more chance to go back and make adjustments. So let's make the most of the adjusting time. And with Saturn so far, having gone back into Pisces, we're looking at spiritual wisdom. We're looking at tuning in. We're looking at listening to our own intuition, taking responsibility for our ability to hear, to listen to our own inner guidance. That's the level that so easily gets forgotten in the sort of rough and tumble of what's going on every day. We forget that we may well have all the answers we need inside us already, and at the moment they're fizzing to be seen, recognized, acknowledged, spoken. Our inner guidance is particularly loud these days, and will get louder. It's funny how we tend to think of the inner guidance as having a different voice from our own, or at least perhaps I'm just speaking for me. But actually, when we speak it, it's our own voice. And actually, we knew that stuff all along. We have a tendency to label it what the authority figures told us when we were young. And they possibly did as well. And they may have done it in a very unkind fashion, in which case we don't want to hear that stuff. But actually, our inner wisdom wouldn't have put it unkindly, so maybe we need to go back and listen again. It's often labelled conscience. We have to kind of check up what out of all the things that were said or understood by us in childhood, what we may have rejected because it didn't sound good at the time, but actually had the kernel of beauty in, and is really the way to go, and how we may well feel relaxed and peaceful when we go that way. The full moon chart still has that pattern, of course, the distant planets. So it's just the faster planets that change at the moment. And there is Mercury at the very beginning of Scorpio, just crossing over the point that Mars was about to make at the new moon. And in the process, completing the yod shape with Uranus and Saturn, Neptune, that was there in the new moon chart, but Mars wouldn't have articulated it. With Mercury there at that point, it can be articulated. So whatever was exacerbating difficult feelings at the new moon gets proper expression or around the full moon, perhaps starting just before. And Venus, around the full moon, would have been going over the south node, gathering the realization that love expresses through kind and useful action, coming up to a lovely sextile to Jupiter, and Jupiter close to that trine to Saturn, actually helping, actually maybe feeding the people. And maybe that won't solve the past, but it feels like the right sort of direction for the process to be unrolling, insofar as it has to do with life. Interesting in the way in the full moon chart that the sun and moon opposite to each other, establishing the continual dichotomy between self and other, Aries and Libra, doesn't actually connect to all the rest. So it's kind of a background, a huge note in the orchestra, thundering through from behind, as it were, while all the bits and pieces get sorted on the surface. But the major thing, I think, is that Venus on the south node. I want to say it's pulling the love into a useful shape so that we can actually reach more towards spiritual evolution, the north node in Pisces. The whole lunar month comes under the symbol of the new moon chart. North node in Pisces, ruled by Neptune, who hasn't quite got back into Pisces yet, but will soon. And the first 6 signs in the lower half, being the personal, our own responses to circumstances, the more personal aspect of the energy flow, so beautifully mirroring the upper 6 signs that are all concerned more with how we as individuals relate to the rest of creation, starting with the other in Libra, and then delving into all the different ways in which we connect with other people and circumstances. That Venus and Mars, in harmony with each other, should be pointing with the yod towards Saturn and Neptune, is suggesting that we stay with the personal, but not to the extent of blaming ourselves or other individuals for the circumstances we find ourselves in. It's a matter of acceptance. It's very much a matter of listening internally. And when we do that, those squares that look quite formidable for both Venus and Mars become a kind of clarity wherein we are able to see what we can do, how to be, the kind of position to hold when faced with what your daily life delivers you. Mars square Pluto, as I said, looks like drastic action. But with that quincunx to Saturn and Neptune, we are informed as to what action will be the most helpful, the most healing, which is why we need to listen carefully inside. We have to follow our own inner guidance, but the quincunx is suggesting that if we make our actions about not just us but everyone, our position in the whole of it all, that we can actually move things forward just by our attitude and by the things we choose to do, the way we choose to express our energy. We move things forward in a good way. And the square from Venus to Uranus, with its quincunx to Saturn and Neptune, is encouraging us to stand back to the extent that we can, not to be uninvolved, but to give ourselves space to see, to observe, so that we're open to the information that will give us the forward-going action. And this is the way to manage this month. You may not do much action, or you may. It can depend on the pressures of your life. And those pressures are not antagonistic. They can actually be full of opportunity for your own growth and advance, and followed through with altruism as well. You advance others as well. So let's be part of our community. Let's be aware. It's something about being able to stay on your surfboard in spite of the waves and in spite of other people struggling with theirs. And the surfboard is our inner connection. Oh, bless us all. Thank you. Virgo speaks. Feed the world with your harvest, food in mugs and bowls for the dear bodies. Encourage emotional flow with music, sweet pipes, tanpura, cello and harp. Inspiring words uplift the heart in good cheer and song. Brave gentleness and courage to be true to oneself. Ideas are food for questing minds that tolerate confusion. Soft touch, kind smile, laughter and tears, and garlands of flowers, perfume and colour, food for the soul, for the journey. Oh, may I feed the world whatever I have, and may I be strong to stand in the love of the one, until the hunger is only for heaven within.